All right, well, thank you very, very much for coming. Sorry about the late change of time. I appreciate so many of you coming, and also people watching online. Thank you to our partner, BSA, the Software Alliance, who've made this whole event possible. We would encourage you to tweet as much as possible. There is a hashtag Playbook Breakfast, which if you tweet on there, or if you go on a website called Slido, you can put questions on there with the hashtag Playbook Breakfast. They will appear magically on this screen in front of me, and I will ask our guest, well, as many of them as got time for. My name's Jack Blanchard. I'm the editor of Politico's London Playbook email. I normally work all through the night and never even see mornings like this, so it's a pleasure to have the day off and be sitting here interviewing Cabinet Minister instead. And thank you, of course, to Matt Hancock, the Secretary of State, for joining us today. So we're going to start off with Victoria Espinel, the President and CEO of BSA, the Software Alliance. You're just going to make a few introductory remarks, and then we'll get on with the interview. So thank you, Victoria. Cheers.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you to everyone for being here. My name is Victoria Espinel. I'm the CEO of BSA, the Software Alliance, the global voice of the software industry, and I'm very excited to be here today with Jack Blanchard and with Minister Hancock. It is impossible to be in London today and not address the World Cup. Although I will confess that I find myself to be slightly conflicted. So I am half Colombian. My father immigrated to the United States with 5 words of English and $20 in his pocket to become a doctor. But at the same time, I have great affection for the UK. I went to LSE to study. Cambridge and Oxford both turned me down, but LSE took me. And I worked in London for 4 years. So I have great affection for the UK, but more than anything else, of course, I'm an American. And while we are gathered here on the 4th of July to talk about the data revolution, like all good Americans, there is another revolution that is also very much on my mind today. But turning to the results of last night, as you know, England has qualified to be in the quarterfinals for the first time in many years, and special praise goes to Gareth Southgate. So thinking a little bit about what makes him different, he played for the team. He understands the players. He understands the challenges that they face. And he has a vision and a strategy to truly inspire both his team and the fans. A few days ago, he said that England's diverse and youthful team represents modern Britain. These are qualities which can just as easily be said about Minister Hancock. It's not by accident that Tech Nation just named him manager of UK Tech's finest Playmakers team for his ability to bring players together and for his forward-thinking tactics. Minister Hancock understands tech and software very well. His vision for the UK is driven by the country being a global leader in digital, a digital dynamo, in fact. When it comes to today's digital economy, there are 2 important keys to success. One is data, the other is skills. Data must be able to move as freely as possible around the world so that we all have access to the information and the services that we need and that we want. E-commerce, IoT, artificial intelligence, all of these depend on the rapid and seamless movement of data. And it is vital that the free flow of data become the international rule. While data underpins the digital economy, it is people that bring it to life. And strengthening enrollment in science, technology, engineering, math will make sure that the British workforce is trained for the jobs of today and the jobs of the future. Fortunately, the UK government recognizes the importance of these issues, and in a report that was released just on Friday in response to a House of Lords inquiry on artificial intelligence, prominent among the report's recommendations were several forward-thinking proposals to expand access to public sector data, an area in which the UK has long been a leader, and to strengthen artificial intelligence skills development. In support of this vision, BSA members are investing in data skills and more in the UK. Salesforce recently announced a $1.9 billion investment over the next 5 years, and IBM, Microsoft, and Siemens are all partners in the government's new Institute of Coding, which brings together 25 universities and 60 companies to offer students a variety of training options. From artificial intelligence to blockchain, virtual reality, quantum computing, all of these emerging tech and the potential benefits that they offer both to our economy and our society are dependent on data and a skilled workforce. And so with that, I'm very much looking forward to hearing the conversation between Jack and Minister Hancock. Thank you all very much for being here today.
And I'd like to welcome Matt onto the stage, please.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Matt. Thank you very much for coming. So, as I'm sure you all know, Matt Hancock is the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. You've held the brief since January, but previously Minister for Digital. You're not yet 40, which I think makes you the youngest member of the Cabinet.
Yep.
Does it make you a millennial? I was just trying to figure that out.
Oh, no, I think my little brother's a millennial.
Little brother's a millennial. You're certainly the only minister who's got their own app, as we all know, and I'm sure you've all seen the Matt Hancock app.
Thanks for the plug.
And you're also the only minister I've seen trying their hand at parkour this week. And congratulations on that.
First one this week.
First one this week. We'll look forward to the Boris videos, presumably coming. But before we get on to tech, I have to start, of course, with the football.
Yeah.
Before you were Secretary of State for Sport, England had a 0% record of winning World Cup penalty shootouts. Since you became Secretary of State for Sport, we now have a 100% record. What is your secret?
Well, that's really kind. So far this morning, I think it's clearly the Mickey taking is going very fast because I've been compared to Gareth Southgate, complimented on my parkour and held responsible for England's football performance on the pitch. None of which are worthy of a compliment.
Did you watch the game last night?
Yeah. Well, I watched most of the game, and then we had to vote because the SNP pulled off this trick. I don't know if it's just because they're unhappy that Scotland didn't make the finals. The SNP forced a whole series of votes. But I was really impressed by the solidity of the government and the party because we were more than 300 people turned up to the votes. People were then allowed to go home because we were winning by 250, 260 votes, but everybody still turned up. But we were going through the voting lobbies. This is the power of technology. We were going through the voting lobbies watching the match on phones. So I was literally voting to fund the NHS for next year against the SNP. And watching the football at the same time. It was digital and sport.
Did you believe they were going to win on penalties? When it got to penalties, did you honestly think? Because I honestly didn't think they were going to win.
Well, you've got to give Gareth Southgate the credit. Not only have they run a real sort of sense of team and a sense of the team representing the whole country, which I think the way he's talked about that has been incredibly powerful. But, he's been there, as we all know, to our pain. And he's himself run up to the penalty spot and not always got it in the back of the net. So he knows what it's like. And the research that they've done into the best psychology of taking penalties was important. So of course I didn't think they were going to win once it got the penalties. It made it even more exciting when they did, but you've got to give them credit for having really thought it through.
It's pretty crazy that you're all having to go and vote like that. Would you like to see digital, technological voting?
No, not for voting in the House of Commons, no.
But you're the Minister for Digital.
Yeah, but one of the things that we've learned as a society is even though we're more connected than ever before, actual human face-to-face interaction is important. And it used to be that you had to have the human face-to-face interaction, right, to get anything done. And now you don't have to, but it's still important to have to make things happen quickly or to get to really understand what somebody else is thinking. And so I find it fascinating that as the world has become more connected, so the importance of a sense of place has become greater. And that's sort of a general comment, but specifically, this matters voting in the House of Commons. Because like last night, when we're all voting, and especially on the really tight votes when the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are voting as well, everybody comes together. And you get all 300-odd Tory MPs and the whole government in one division lobby, and a division lobby is about a third of the width and 3 times as long as this room. And we're all packed in, shoulder to shoulder, and you get the chance to see anyone. So even as and this is, for backbenchers, this is incredibly important. If you want to lobby the Chancellor on some particular issue around your constituency, you know that when Parliament is sitting, probably most weeks, and certainly within a fortnight, you're going to see the Chancellor. And even as a minister, you can sort all sorts of problems with a 5-minute conversation in the voting lobbies. It's the only time the whole of government comes together. And so it's incredibly important.
Okay, right, a good testimony for analog voting.
Yeah, it's an unintended consequence, I'll grant you that.
Let's talk about the tech industry, because I know a lot of people here are here to hear about that. Now, the UK tech industry is it's the envy of Europe. It's a fantastic, futuristic. It's going to be a very important part of our economy. It already is a big part of, certainly, of London's economy. Is Brexit going to be a positive thing for the tech industry?
If we get it right. We can make Brexit a positive force for good across the piece, and especially in tech. And I think there's a big opportunity here. I think the impact of technology is going to be bigger than Brexit over the long term. I think that the force of the technologies that are being invented now are going to be felt for the rest of this century. And I think we've got an opportunity to shape it now. And I think that the UK has a real opportunity, because it's true that this is the 3rd biggest tech hub in the world. Of course, the United States and China are the 2 very, very big ones. This is true in AI in particular, which is the most dynamic, revolutionary technology at the moment. But it's true across the broader tech piece. And it's going very well. Investment doubled from 2016 to 2017. I'm going to France this evening. I love what President Macron is doing with La French Tech. But investment in the UK last year was more than 3 times that of France, and it was bigger than France, Germany, and Spain put together. So we've got to remember this is the tech hub of Europe, and it has great depth.
So you say we've got to get it right. So let's talk a little bit about what that needs to look like. Because I've spoken to lots of people in tech companies, and you must be speaking to them all the time. You know they have concerns that we're not going to get it right. And I think one of the particular issues is about skills and immigration. You know, some of the most successful UK startups have been started up by EU nationals who've moved to London or other parts of the UK and set them up. And there is a concern that is going to stop, that people are going to be looking elsewhere. They're going to find it harder to move to the UK, or they're going to feel less wanted by the UK. How are you going to address that when we still have no immigration policy?
You've come a long way since your tabloid days. So we can absolutely get this right. And I think we had some pointers to it in the recent announcements we made on visas. Look, we need access to the best talent from around the world. Yes, there have been some EU nationals who've come and started great businesses here, but there have been people from all around the world who've come and started great businesses here. And that's the approach that we need to take for the top talent. So our example of our startup visas that we announced during London Tech Week, I think this is a brilliant idea. We saw it operating in Chile, actually, where with 2,500 startup visas aimed at people who want to come here to start and grow a business, where we'll select you on the basis of you having a brilliant idea for how you can be an entrepreneur. And then also, we made sure that people can come in through the more classic Tier 2 system. But at the same time, one of the opportunities of Brexit is that we can set our own immigration policy as a country and make sure that those who we do invite to come here are the brightest and the best from around the world. I think that's an opportunity.
Is there a danger that the message that's being received by young graduates in Madrid or in Hamburg or wherever is that, you know, Britain's not as open to them moving and starting up their new firm here as it used to be?
No, I think that Britain is at its best and successful when we're open and international and confident and look out towards the world, and I think that's where we need to be.
And what about funding for these firms? Because a lot of the funding comes, as you know, through venture capital. A lot of that money comes from the European Investment Bank. That's all about to disappear.
Oh, give me a break. I mean, firstly, the depth of the venture pool here in the UK is so much greater than it was a generation ago, and we are absolutely determined to keep it growing. And it is really important, and it is at the heart of the strength of this ecosystem. And some of the big exits that we've seen here in the last few years have really helped that. When SoftBank bought Arm, that was a £24 billion investment, essentially into the Cambridge ecosystem. Which is obviously very closely aligned with London. And that's fantastic. Now, we also have put more funding into the British Business Bank to more than replace the European Investment Fund from the EIB, should we come out of that. And I know that the European Investment Fund has been taken a rather difficult approach, even ahead of Brexit, whilst we're still members of the European Union, which to my mind has been totally inappropriate, because the whole rule is that you're in the EU until you leave it. And we know that there are funds there are venture capital funds that are supported by the European Investment Fund, but we have more than replaced that funding already from the taxpayer. But taxpayer funding is only part of this, and you've got to be very careful to make sure that the taxpayer support that goes in such a way as to help generate a stronger private sector ecosystem. We put the cash in, and we're absolutely determined to get that right. And so the strength of the funding ecosystem here is only going to grow.
The other issue that people raise is data sharing with Europe, and we've still, it would seem, haven't really had any conversations with the Commission about that yet, because that's for the future relationship.
We have. So those conversations have been taking place over the last couple of months.
Okay.
I'm confident that we'll get a good deal. We've set out how we want something that's stronger than adequacy, because we think it's in the interests of both sides. It is so self-evidently in the interests of the European continent as well as the UK to have good data sharing agreements that I'm confident we'll get to a good place. But this is an area where we in the UK have been very front foot. We published a paper last August on what we wanted to see, and we've been engaging on that basis.
Have firms made clear to you how serious it would be were there not to be any data sharing deal with Europe? I mean, are you aware of
Yes, we're very clear that this is important, but it's very strongly in the interests of both sides.
Yeah. So, but the sort of catastrophic collapse of talks and no deal Brexit that we talk about would be pretty serious on that front, from your point of view.
Well, we could get through it, but it would be far, far better if we had a deal that allowed for the free flow of data, and that's true for the UK, but it's just as true for the Europeans.
It's been a big year for data protection, obviously. The Facebook.
You've been getting the emails.
I've heard about it. Yeah. Has your personal use of data changed this year as things have changed? Do you find
that is a great question.
Do you act differently?
I've unsubscribed from a few things.
Not Politico, of course.
Not the Politico morning email and
you.
their daily playbook, which is incredibly valuable and worth reading every day.
Yeah, you can clip that bit. Thank you. Yeah. But seriously, do you use Facebook? Do you use Facebook less now? Do you?
I use Facebook as a public figure. So I use Facebook as an MP and as a minister. It's hard when you're in public life to use it as a basis for for
the way other people. Well, okay. Do you let your kids use it?
No. Why? Why would I? They're 11. My oldest is 11. She can go and have tea with her friends in their house if she wants to see them.
But I think a lot of 11-year-old kids probably do like the idea of Facebook.
Well, they may like the idea, but I seem to remember Facebook's own terms of reference says that it's only for the over 13s.
Okay. What is your advice to people when they are using that, older people, when they are using that sort of technology? Do you feel that people are too uncautious in the way that they share their data?
That's a good question. So, I think that there is society is maturing in how we use these amazing new tools. I think the tools that are available, including social media, are of great power for good. But I think that society needs to mature further in how we use them to make sure we get the best of them. Now, I think that the platforms are engaged in this and helping a lot. Apple's recent announcement, for instance, of the sleep mode, where you can pre-program that your phone will turn off, I think is a classic way of technology solving some of the problems that technology creates. There are areas where laws are needed to solve some of the problems that technology creates. The Data Protection Act just passed as an example, and we've said that we'll legislate towards a duty of care for online platforms. And then there's other things the government can do non-legislatively, for instance, working with the companies to take down terrorist material and child abuse at the really high harm end. But there's a whole load of changes that we need to make as a society to make the most of this technology. I recently said that I admired the head teachers who ban mobile phones in their schools. This isn't something that in the UK we'd legislate on it. The French have done a decree to all schools. That's not the way that the education system works in the UK. But I think it is the sort of thing that we need to be doing to make sure that we harness the technology as a force for good and are open and clear-eyed to the fact that it has some downsides. But I'm also absolutely clear that the upsides are much bigger overall than the downsides. It's just that you can't pretend that the downsides aren't there.
Do you find your own view on regulations changed maybe from a few years ago, now that you're in this department and you're seeing how these companies work? You see more of a role for it than maybe you did in the past?
I was the minister responsible for deregulation for a few years.
Exactly.
In the coalition government. That was because we were trying to get rid of rules that were really archaic and overburdensome. We made a lot of progress in that space, and the old 1 in, 2 out rule on regulation, and that was very important. I think that what we need is but even as a deregulation minister, I still think that freedom works in a framework, and you need to have the basis of a rule of law in which for society to operate. Right? I'm not a libertarian, and this space is completely new from a regulatory point of view, and regulatory frameworks can help innovation. Take the sandbox that the FCA introduced in financial services. It's one of their regulatory sandbox, and pro-innovation regulation is one of the reasons that a mile away from here, on the borders of the city and Silicon Roundabout, as it's called, is one of the strongest fintech clusters. No, the strongest fintech cluster in the world. And it's because of a combination of capital, the proximity of the financial industry with our tech industry, and pro-innovation regulation. So I think that my overall philosophical attitude hasn't changed, but we've worked our way through a whole thicket of old stuff that just needed to be sorted out. And now I'm in a role where we're faced with an area that simply hasn't had a structured, overarching regulatory approach.
And is it really possible to regulate some of these firms?
Yes.
I mean, aren't they too big?
No.
Is Google too big?
No.
So how are you going to tell them what to do? Because
there's a building, you can just see it over there. We pass laws and then people abide by them.
And do you think that will be an effective way, actually, of
yes.
getting these companies?
So I feel really strongly about
Really?
this. Yes. There was an attitude that pervaded for maybe a generation that these companies are global and therefore you can't regulate them. Not true. That these companies, the technology changes fast and therefore you can't regulate it. Not true. That people don't really understand it and therefore we can't regulate it. Also not true. Take any other industry where we say that where companies are big and international. Take the oil industry or the car industry, right? Are we going to not regulate them because they're global? I mean, what a ridiculous concept. Just because the internet is global, yes, that means it's better to make these rules and norms, whether they're legislative and regulatory rules or norms of behavior. Yes, it's better to do this globally or at least internationally. But by God, if the UK as a society, represented legitimately through Parliament and from Parliament in government, wants to do something, then that is what we do. It's called democracy. And I think that the fact that this that people rolled over in the face of global companies in an area that they didn't understand for about a generation has led to some of the problems that we see today of the fact that, you know, for the really big tech companies, you know, their place in society would be stronger today if we'd had more of a framework that had political accountability and social acceptance in the past. And that's where we're trying to get to. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the tech companies are not up in arms with the fact that we're going to legislate, for instance, on a duty of care to people on your social media platform. And that is because they want some rules of the road to be able to say, we abide by these rules of the road that your society has set.
Aren't you ultimately, though, outsourcing a lot of this policing to these big private firms? I mean, is that the right approach?
So the principles and the rules should be set by Parliament, because Parliament is the legitimate authority in the UK. And of course, the execution of them, a lot of it has to be done with industry. And I'd say writing the rules needs to be done with industry, because there is a whole host of unintended consequences that can come out of this. That happens in lots of different areas as well.
But all we hear from ministers again and again is they're not doing enough. They're not doing enough on extremism. Right. They're not doing enough on abuse. You know, it's been the same story for a long time. Is it really going to change?
Yes. So I'm trying to change this. So I think that the approach that we've taken of saying we're not going to legislate either because you're global or because you're too big or for whatever reasons people wrongly thought. We're not going to legislate, but we're going to do this on a voluntary basis. I think that has caused this unhappiness in the public debate between politicians and the public more broadly, and indeed newspapers and the big platforms, because a policy of exaltation has big downsides. It means you have to exhort, and exhorting tends to take place in a pretty noisy way through the front pages of the newspapers. Far better for us to say, we are going to set a framework. That is what happens in democracies. It will be freedom within that. There will be freedom within that framework. We're going to talk to you about it in advance. We're going to do it in a consultative way. We're going to talk to civil society as well, and academia, and people who represent children who are affected by some of the downsides, for instance, like the NSPCC, who've done great work in this area. And we're going to come forward with a set of pro-innovation regulation, and then you live within that, and we don't need to keep shouting at each other. And I think that is better for the industry, and I think it's better for, it's a better way to run a country.
If you look at the screen to your left, some people have been sending in questions on slido.com, which is a website where you can put questions in. Now, if you look at the middle one, what is the government doing to protect people, particularly children, from the addictive powers of technology? And can you be addicted to the Matt Hancock app?
If anyone is addicted to the Matt Hancock app, then they have a very strong love of West Suffolk.
I bet you check it every day.
Yeah, I do. It's great. I mean, the app is, everybody loves the fact that I've got an app. It's proved brilliant at communicating with constituents. But I've also tried to prove something else, which is you can have a really pleasant, you can curate a pleasant environment. If people are unpleasant, they're allowed to take the mickey out of me, right? Mm-hmm. But if people are unpleasant to each other, I don't just remove that post. I kick them off the app altogether.
Really?
And
do you moderate it yourself?
Well, my team moderate it in Parliament, but we've recently put in a piece of AI that was developed by Jigsaw, which is Google's sort of research philanthropic arm, that surfaces aggressive messages, and it's working really well. So this is another example of, in this case, Google, the big companies using technology to solve some of the problems that the technology has thrown up. So the Jigsaw piece of AI in the Matt Hancock app allows my parliamentary team to very quickly spot unpleasant messages, and then we just kick the people off. And so so we're trying to prove that it can be that you can do things differently, and as the app owner, you are. I feel accountable for. I feel like I've got a duty of care as the app owner to how pleasant it is to be on the app, and I think that other social media companies should explicitly take the same approach.
And that's the sort of thing we could see to deal with some of the problems that prominent women in particular, female MPs, have talked about.
Yes.
Have you been trolled yourself in that way?
Not seriously. No. I mean, some people are. On some subjects, you get some really aggressive feedback. But I'm lucky I haven't had death threats or rape threats like some, especially female public figures get. But I do get some pretty unpleasant language. And it's funny, it's on some subjects.
Would you advise some people to stay off social media because of the experience they have?
Oh, I would definitely advise people to... I would advise people not to take the comments seriously, and I'd advise people not really to read the responses. You can use this piece of jigsaw technology to overlay onto your Twitter feed so that it stops you from seeing some of the aggressive messages back.
I could do with that. That would be great.
Right. So then if I replied to you and said, Jack, that was a great post, would love to talk about it, you'd still see it. But if somebody else replied and said something that I'm not going to repeat, something really aggressive, then the piece of AI would take it out. And Twitter themselves have got have now taken out some that use swear words and rude language, and then at the bottom, if you in the responses to a post, you can click on a button and say see all of the responses, and then that's where some really unpleasant garbage sits.
Does it work for angry emails from cabinet colleagues as well?
I don't know what you mean.
There's a serious question there. What is the government doing to protect people, particularly children, from the addictive powers of technology?
Yes, so I think this is important. It's part of a duty of care. We've also introduced a code, a statutory code, so that websites have to have age-appropriate design if they're aimed at children. But an awful lot of this responsibility resides with parents too. So yes, the tech companies have responsibilities. For instance, the fact that they say that you shouldn't be on a social media platform under the age of 13 typically, or 16 in the case of WhatsApp. I think that they should police that more properly.
It's hard to do though, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's not. And in fact, there's technology that's been developed in Britain that allows them to do it. And of course it could be done. And that sort of response, both saying it's hard to do and the face that you pulled, has been part of the problem. Government has taken that attitude as well. I'm not meaning to pick on you,
no, pick on me.
People have taken the attitude, well, that's all very difficult. And sometimes, Amber Rudd pushed the main platforms to do more on terrorist content, and they said, oh, but the technology doesn't exist. A phrase that I simply don't believe anymore, because if we want the technology to exist, we can design it. And so we went to a UK startup and we asked them to design a piece of AI to spot terrorist content. And it works, and they're now embedding it. And so, we don't take this, the technology doesn't exist, very, how should I put it? If somebody says the technology doesn't exist these days, it isn't usually long before you can invent it.
But what about kids being addicted to computer games? I mean, that is a big problem that a lot of parents are facing now, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Is there something, does government have a role in that? Or is your message to parents, look, you have to do a better job of keeping your kids off
No, I think
the screen?
I think it is one of the hardest times to be a parent. My kids don't really play computer games. Other than sometimes their homework has a sort of gaming element to it, but it's basically educational. but there is a. I have a problem with games that are actively designed to use psychology that purposefully makes them addictive. If you're designing a computer game purposefully to be addictive, I think that's a problem, and I think it's wrong.
Is there a role for government in doing something about
the role
that?
for government here is difficult, but it comes down again to this duty of care.
Okay. Last question about regulation. We've talked about it a lot. Do we need global regulation of AI, and how on earth would you go about it?
Yes.
How do you regulate Chinese AI development and US military AI development? And it's
Well-
not realistic, is it? I mean, it's just going to happen, and we just have to watch it unfold over the next 50 years.
Well, AI as a technology is not only impacting our society, making our lives easier, and having a big economic impact, but the imperative to stay at the front of the queue, at the front of the race for AI development, it is also geopolitical. Throughout history, the countries that have had the strongest economies have also had a powerful place around the world. I think that AI in particular, and following it in time, if the technology can ever be made to work at scale, quantum computing, have the strength of capabilities that they will alter geopolitics as well as economics. And so it's vital that we stay at the front of that race. Now, AI has to be developed in ways that are good for society. We've recently launched the new Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, which is focused on ensuring that we have the norms, the standards, recommendations for where we need regulatory interventions. GDPR, of course, underpins our use of data here, and the Data Protection Act more broadly. But the non-statutory standards that people abide by in ensuring that they use AI ethically are very important, and the new centre will be at the heart of designing those. Now, I think we can design them in such a way that they become world-leading, and people around the world adopt our standards. But of course, there'll be actors. You mentioned, the U.S. military and China. There's other actors who aren't nearly as advanced, but would be much more malign if they could use this technology very powerfully.
And they will. I mean, they will, right? It's going to become more and more prevalent. Do you have sort of lie awake at night, cold sweat, thinking about some of the things where this is going to go?
Ultimately, the solutions to the mass availability of a very powerful technology have to be about how people organize themselves. And how people organize themselves ultimately, when there's no higher authority, comes down to politics. We've been living for 70 years now with a technology that can destroy the world, in nuclear technology. And it is through politics and diplomacy as an extension of politics that we have ensured that there hasn't been a nuclear holocaust. I think we have to have the same attitude to AI, which is it is likely in the decades ahead to be so powerful that it could be highly destructive. And we have to make sure that we have both the rules-based international framework and the political and diplomatic backing to ensure that AI is developed for the good of humanity.
So we're talking about global treaties on the scale of dealing with nuclear weapons?
I think that we're in the foothills of dealing with this yet. It was, for instance, on the G7 agenda, because dealing with this as like-minded nations is important. It's part of a wider discussion about ensuring that we have the digital technology that is growing up around us is used for the benefit of mankind.
And what is the one thing you're most excited about? What's going to be the most fantastic aspect of AI in a few years' time that's going to revolutionize people's lives?
I think that potential, can I give you two?
Yeah.
The potential to save lives in medtech is one of the biggest opportunities of AI. The Prime Minister recently launched a grand challenge in AI, which we're very excited about, which is about in which she focused the question on how can we save lives of cancer sufferers. I think there's huge opportunity there, and we with the NHS in the UK, if we get the rules around use of data in the NHS right, can ensure that both we have stronger privacy and it's easier to use as a patient, and that we can use it in innovative ways that save lives. And the second area that I've really focused on is transport. You know, the amount of time that people waste in their lives sitting behind the wheel of a car is unbelievable. It has bad social outcomes in terms of health, but also in terms of it's bad for the environment. It means that most families in most countries in the developed world put their second biggest investment of capital into something that they use less than 10% of the time. After their house, the next biggest investment in capital is a car. And you know, if you drive around the major cities of the UK, for instance, you see all these cars down the sides of both sides of the road, all sitting there doing absolutely nothing most of the time. I think the average car usage is 4% of the time in the UK. And it's a massive waste of capital, if you think about it in a big picture way. And I think when we can get to autonomous vehicles in a well-organized system, the combination of autonomous and low-emission, largely electric vehicles is over a period of years and decades is a really exciting opportunity.
And we get to a point where the idea of owning your own car was just a crazy thing they did back in the 20th century.
My younger brother, my millennial younger brother, who, by the way, runs a fintech company, so he's kind of in this space, he doesn't, of course he doesn't. He's never even dreamed of buying a car. And he's only 5 years younger than me.
Okay. Let's talk about a few of the other aspects of your brief, because it's obviously not just tech. My background is in newspapers and in local newspapers.
Yeah.
And I have watched with some horror as the local newspaper industry has almost collapsed over the last 10 years. It's certainly nothing like what it was when I started out.
Yeah.
Do you have those concerns, and are there things that government can do to help?
Yes, I have those concerns, big style.
Yeah.
I recently saw a photo of the Oxford Mail newsroom. And I remember going there when I was at university in Oxford, and a friend of mine had a sort of internship in the Mail, and I went in, and it was this buzzing, huge open plan, buzzing room, real sense of excitement of people flying around. And this photograph just had a group of maybe 8 to 10 reporters in one corner and patches on the floor, on the otherwise empty floor from the drips through the ceiling. And it was a really sad sight. And this matters because there's many industries that are being disrupted by technology. And that's fine because it's good for consumers. It's difficult for the people who are disrupted, and we've got to make sure that they're helped and supported and get the skills to take on a new career. But ultimately, it's how economies move on. In the case of journalism, the reason there's a public policy problem, and the reason that we care about it as a policy issue, is that high-quality journalism underpins our democracy, and without it, you can't have a highly functioning democracy. And in the UK, we've seen the collapse in the number of journalists by over a quarter over the past decade. I don't know if you saw the figures that Francis Cairncross put out last week. You know, so I've asked Francis, who is absolutely brilliant, to do a review before the end of the year on how we can have a sustainable model for high-quality journalism in the UK. And this is a particular problem for local newsrooms. Now, there's lots of good innovations that are coming out of this. More people read news because most people read it online now. It's just harder to monetize online news. And but in local newsrooms in particular, this is difficult because historically there was this cross-subsidy from the the fact that if you wanted to get a message out to people, you paid for an advert on one side of the page, and on the other side of the page there was the copy, which is expensive to produce. And that cross-subsidy has been disintermediated by the internet.
Can the government intervene and actually help? Is there
Yeah,
more
there's
for
a number of
government
ways.
to-
For instance, there's some ways intentional, some ways unintentional. So firstly, we can set the rules of copyright for the use of copy. There's a copyright directive going through the European Parliament at the moment. We strongly support the directive because it supports content, appropriate payment for content. There's ways that you can support by indirectly. So, for instance, a couple of the big companies have directly provide for journalists who support local papers. The BBC and Google have both made contributions in this space. That's a sort of subsidy argument, not government subsidy, which would be a problem, but indirect subsidy, which I think is important at the moment, but I'd like to find a long-term commercial solution. But it's very welcome. And there's also the changes that the platforms have made. When Google removed its one-click-free policy, I thought that was a really positive step because it means that you can now more effectively have ask people to pay for your content. In music, we thought the music industry had died in the same way and was only sustained by live music. And the move to having subscription-based music services has actually been the basis of a massive recovery of the music industry, especially the UK industry. And so there are lots of different potential solutions, and we're looking at them all.
Let me ask you about TV, because that's all anyone seems to be talking about at the moment is Love Island. Are you watching it?
I've seen it. I'm not following it.
You're not watching it, are you?
I've seen it. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not. I was talking to one of the producers yesterday. It's absolutely fascinating how it's made.
Do you have any concerns about the sort of message it might give out to young people about body image and things like
I
that?
think that's a matter for society as a whole, and Ofcom regulates this space. I recently saw that there'd been some complaints to Ofcom that somebody had watched Naked Attraction and it involved nudity. Ofcom haven't taken that complaint further.
Is it time for a female presenter on Question Time?
It's about time, yes.
Okay. We've really got to talk about Brexit a little bit, Matt. You've got a big meeting coming up on Friday. Your old friend George Osborne described it as the worst house party in history taking place at Chequers this weekend. Are you looking forward to it?
Yeah. I don't agree with George on Brexit. I think it's important to come to our collective view as a government and then publish the white paper and then roll on with the next stage of negotiations ahead of October.
Mm-hmm. And do you think it's important to get behind whatever it is the Prime Minister's going to announce at this time?
I think we need to
for
come
Brexit?
together as a government and get behind it, and then we need to negotiate with the Commission. The negotiations inevitably have been noisy, but each time we've come to a moment, we've reached a successful conclusion, whether in December, at the December Council, or March, and then we made some progress in June, but it was not intended to be a big Brexit moment, and then October's the next moment when we need to finalise the withdrawal agreement and have shape around the future partnership.
What's your advice to colleagues who have been making quite a lot of noise recently and putting pressure on the Prime Minister from both sides?
I believe very strongly in collective responsibility. And I believe that when you are in a government and in a cabinet, your responsibility is to pull together, to have vigorously to put forward your point of view in private, and then to come to a view and then back it.
And has there been a bit too much noise beyond that of
Well,
late?
you'll have noticed that I haven't been contributing to that noise because I don't believe in... because I believe in collective responsibility and the responsibilities that places on you. And my belief in not criticising my colleagues extends to not criticising them for...
Criticising.
For that.
How disappointing. Okay, how about this? Would you vote for Brexit this time around if we had another vote?
We're not going to have another vote. So we're not... I think a second referendum would be a complete disaster. I think
Why?
that would be terrible. Because whatever you think of the view, and obviously I voted Remain and campaigned for Remain, we live in a democracy. And I think the damage to our trust in our democracy would be so bad that it would outweigh the worst possible deal. I think that not only the 52%, but it's not a homogenous group of people who voted for Brexit, obviously, but there's a significant proportion of people who are sceptical that we will deliver on Brexit, and we will deliver on it. And when you ask, in Britain, we're a grown-up country, we're a democracy. When you ask people their view, we then abide by it.
Now, some people extend that argument and say that if we do leave the EU but stay extremely close to it in lots of ways, regulation and so on, that would also be a betrayal of that. Do you subscribe to that?
I think that the PMs set out the approach that we're taking, and obviously we'll have discussions on what's in the white paper on Friday. I'm not going. We've got to deliver on Brexit and on what was promised, and that is but ultimately getting the best possible arrangement, the best possible future deal, is obviously a difficult task, but it's eminently doable as well.
You often seem to be described in newspapers as the ambitious Matt Hancock. I don't know if you've noticed that. Would you like to one day run the country, Matt?
Not really. I'm enjoying my job. I love it. I mean, DCMS is an absolutely brilliant department. It used to be called the Department for Fun. Then lots of my predecessors were worried that it was called the Department for Fun. But there's now so much heavy lifting on the digital side, lots of which we talked about. We haven't even got into broadband. That actually having a bit of fun sometimes is a good thing.
And have you tried to bring a bit of fun to it? We've seen the videos of the.
Have
I? Do you think that's important, though?
Yes.
There's some of your.
Well, firstly, I think the country needs a bit of fun at the moment, and the footballers are providing it in spades. I think I'm the Secretary of State responsible for sport. I think I should be out there playing sport. I love it.
But there's more than that. A couple of your colleagues, Ruth Davidson, Liz Truss, have both spoken about how maybe your party hasn't always been able to portray a sense of fun, and maybe that's been one of the problems in the past. Do you subscribe to that? Could the Tories be a bit more Matt Hancock?
I think it's important to have a sense of fun and a sense of proportion, but a sense of proportion also means a sense of proportion when the things are really big. So in government, you've got to show what you want the country to be, and I want it to be a place where we enjoy ourselves as well as doing the important, big, heavy things, and so as a minister, I believe in that. I also believe very much in being yourself, right? And I love sport, and I quite like trying new sports, as you might have seen on my Twitter feed, like parkour. I mean, when they came to me and said, why don't you try parkour? I was like, yes, why not?
Are you a cricket man at heart? Is that your sport?
That is my my first love in sport.
You and the Prime Minister chat about cricket, because she's the same, isn't she?
Yeah, I saw her at Lord's, actually,
really?
A couple of weeks ago.
But this month you are football focused.
Yeah.
Okay.
Loving football.
I think we've run out of time. They're all nodding at me. Do you want to answer one more question from here before we go?
Right,
have you got time for
do you
that?
want to pick it,
We're going to miss
I?
Prime Minister's questions.
Can I pick my own question?
You choose one and answer it.
Anyway, we've run out of time, haven't we? Do policymakers know enough about different business models? I think, and then hashtag unintended consequences. The answer is we do not know about every different business model, because there's as many different business models as there are businesses. And I started life in a tech company. My first job was writing code, trying to decode the Y2K bug. And that makes me feel old. And the truth is, I know for a fact that if we in government tried to write the answer to some of the problems we've been talking about today, we will get it wrong. We can only get it right talking to people, both a consultative approach in the sort of formal putting out consultation papers, but also highly engaged. So one of the things I've tried to do with the department is say, get out there and get out and talk to people. All my civil servants, all of them should be out talking to people about what's going on, and to try to understand the world that we live in and the world that we're therefore trying to we are shaping the framework for. So you can't do it on your own. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about it. You've got to get stuck in, and it's fine for me to get stuck in, but the whole team needs to as well.
All right, a minister enjoying his job. Thank you very much, Matt Hancock. Thank you too to our partners, BSA, the Software Alliance, for making it all possible. Thank you all for coming in today. Thank you for watching online as well. There are some evaluation forms on your seat. If you write down what was great, what was crap, we will try and do it even better next time. We are doing some fringe events coming up at conference season. There will be one at the Conservative Party conference on September the 30th as well. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank you too, Matt. Cheers. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks very much.